investors sustain a bargain hunting interest in the Nigerian equities market, with broad-based buying across all sectors as the all-share index hit a forward high on Tuesday this week. However, analysts believe this sentiment could be short-lived as a rally in Tier 1 stocks may trigger some profit taking. Praise Ihansekhien, team lead at Meristem Research, joins me for a market review. Praise, thank you so much. Pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you.
So it looks like we're seeing the market finally gaining some momentum. We've been stuck at that 3-4% stage for a while now, but we saw the market hitting as high as 5.2%. But talk to us. I imagine a lot of the sentiment is coming from the Q1 numbers that have been majorly good for investors. But what are your thoughts?
It's interesting that we expected this rally to happen, say, February, when the Monetary Policy Committee implemented the first hold. And then, we had reduction in the inflation numbers with the rebase numbers. And so every other macro indicator was more or less positive then. But the market still, the sentiment was still negative.
Right.
And so coming now into, we are seeing Q1 numbers come out, they're really positive for across sectors. The banks are still doing well. Consumer goods sectors are largely recovering from all the troubles they've been facing for the past 2 years. Even the technological sector, we saw MTN release a profit of about 130-something billion, and then they made over 1 trillion in one quarter, which I remember in 2022 we're celebrating MTN doing about 1 trillion in the year. So doing that 1 trillion in the quarter now. So most of the results that have come out in this first quarter have been really positive, and that has helped to spur investors' interest.
I wanted to talk about some market news, or may I assume market moving news, and that around Seplat, the ongoing agreement between Seplat and NLNG to provide 150,000 tons of gas for Seplat. I know Seplat has a plant that is still idle, and obviously this is going to revenue for Seplat. Talk to us about market reaction, if any, and what this means for the company and the stock.
So since Seplat acquired some assets from Mobil, they saw about a 50% increase in their gas reserves, gas supplies. And so this collaboration with NLNG will help them, to be able to also increase their revenue proceeds from that angle. Right. And for NLNG, like you said, it's going to boost their own gas supplies by about 12%. Looking at it on how it's going to impact Seplat, the funny thing is we've been expecting a reaction from, even without this deal, Seplat should easily have seen a lot of reaction from their full year numbers that they released, and also what is expected to come. But of course, there's been a little bit of a dull on investors' side. I think investors are going to be very excited about the NLNG deal, although because it's not a long-term deal, it's a temporary shock for NLNG. It might not have a lasting impact. Investors might not decide to, stay in the stock as long as that. But then we also need to consider the fact that Seplat is quite expensive to buy, and then there are other alternatives in the energy sector that are more or less a little bit cheaper, even in terms of valuation. So the rush, the influx of investors to Seplat might not be as significant because the terms of the deal is not permanent. It's just going to start in Q3, and we don't know how long it's going to last for, but it's just they're going to start supplying them in the fourth quarter of the year. And
for the sector generally, it hasn't done well because obviously we've all been watching oil prices decline due to the trade war, especially with China and all of that. What are your projections for the oil and gas industry? You see a recovery, or do you think investors are going to focus on the domestic stories around the companies themselves, for Seplat, for instance, to help keep the sector up?
The interesting thing about the oil and gas industry is that you cannot detach the global happenings from the sector. For 2 years, in fact, from the COVID period, ending of COVID period, 2022, when oil prices went as high as 130 barrels, you saw Seplat and other companies record significant numbers. And so that's it's not possible to completely detach what's happening with the oil markets from Seplat, Aradel, and the likes. Of course, there's been that significant impact. I was having a conversation with a few of my analysts some weeks ago. There's no scenario in which we do not see a decline in oil prices, because there's no scenario in this trade war that China is not affected. Right. And if China is affected, it's going to also lead to a decline in their oil consumption, and that would affect the oil market. So the energy sector is definitely they're going to feel the impact. However, for downstream sectors, the story within Nigeria would also be very important. The story with NNPC, with Dangote refinery, and all those other factors will come into play. And then, depending on how it plays out at the end of the day, there might be some respite here and there. But remember that the oil and gas sector has been the highest performing sector on the exchange for about 2-3 years now. So the sector is quite resilient. It's going to be hit from the fact that there's trade war happening, but at the end of the day, the stories around the domestic environment would also have its own impact.
All right, interesting. We have about 2 minutes left. Just thinking about how the market is going to proceed from here on. We have a couple of Q1 numbers that the market is still expecting, but beyond that, there's MPC in 2 weeks' time that investors probably will be keeping an eye on. So talk to us about your forecast going forward, taking into account MPC, expectations for a potential outcome and all of that.
It's going to be very interesting because, like I said at the beginning, investors don't really react to MPC in February. The investors in the equities market don't really react to the hold that was announced in February. We think this time around, of course, MPC will have to consider the inflation numbers, global inflation, what other monetary policy authorities are doing. They need to consider all these things, and putting all these things together, the most likely scenario for them would be to hold. And then if they do hold, we think that combined with the fact that the numbers have been positive from the company, corporate actions have been quite positive this time around, we might still continue to see that positive sentiment still stay in the market beyond the MPC.
All right, we'll keep our fingers crossed. Praise, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Praise
Ihansekhien, team lead at Meristem Research.